Salim, it's being called Trump's war, it's being called Trump's Benghazi, and it's being called those things from people who don't have a clue about the history of Iran, Iraq, Benghazi, or even what happened over in Iraq last night as we're recording this when Donald Trump's orders, Qassem Soleimani, if I'm pronouncing Soleimani, if I'm pronouncing that right or wrong, was taken out like yesterday's trash, as he should have been, because he was a violent fomenter of terrorism and death in the Middle East and abroad. So perhaps you can put into perspective, historical perspective, first of all, the fact that this is just one in a series of incidences started by Iran, even going back as far as 40 years, although let's not dwell too long on ancient history. Just to put it into perspective for the people out there like Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP here in Canada, who thought that the action took place in Iran instead of Iraq. Put it in perspective for us, please, Salim.
Yes, Robert, and let's not forget, trying to put some sense into Justin Trudeau and his former foreign minister, now his deputy prime minister, or whatever title she's carrying, that is Chrystia Freeland, and the whole lot of the people in the Canadian media, the mainstream corporate media. Now, you're absolutely right. There are all sorts of noise that is coming out. Ironically, I mean, we'll get into this discussion, and as you are asking me to put some sort of a historical perspective on this matter, on this issue. But just for the moment, I mean, this is 24 hours, I mean, less than 24 hours, as we know. Last evening, the strike took place, and a Major General, Qassem Soleimani, with 6 other individuals who were accompanying him, were taken out in a Baghdad airport or airfield. They were headed there to fly out. And the noise that is now taken over from the moment the confirmation came and the Pentagon released the confirmation, that is, the American military released the confirmation that Major Soleimani, the head of the Al-Quds force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is dedicated to the terrorist side of the Iranian operation, had been taken out. The noise became that there it is, Donald Trump has ignited World War III. And this noise, this chatter, since then and right through today, as I have tried to follow it with my limited time, has been in the West, in Europe, in Britain, in Canada, and among the Democrats and their allies and the corporate media in the United States, that President Trump has ignited World War III, that this is a gross assault on the sovereignty of the Iranian Republic by assassinating the top military officer as if he was a Mahatma Gandhi or a male version of Mother Teresa, instead of being what happened 3 months ago when President Trump ordered the strike and took out Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the ISIS leader, who was a self-declared caliph of Islam in Syria, took him out. Or if you go back further in this context, when President Trump warned the North Korean leader soon after he came to the White House with all the noise going on, that beware, you little rocket man, we have a very big red button. Or even further, Robert, when President Trump was having a state dinner at his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, visiting President Trump in April, I think it was April of 2017, just about 2-3 months after President had been inaugurated. And while in the midst of the dinner and the dessert being served, President Trump turned around to President Xi Jinping and told him that he felt that he should inform the president, the excellency, that he had just ordered 59 cruise missiles on the Syrian military base as a punishment, retaliation for the Syrian regime firing chemical weapons, Or when in May 2018, President Trump ordered the move of the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And the same group of people from New York Times, from CNN, Washington Post, across the Western democracies, including Canada, that President Trump had ignited a massive blowout that would take place in the Middle East as a result of moving the American embassy to Jerusalem. You look back now, Robert, this is now 2020. This is the year of the election in America. It's 3.5 years into the President Trump's presidency. As 2020 goes forward, there's going to be the primary season beginning next month in Iowa, the Democrats choosing their nominee for the election. And there's going to be chatter and noise. But if you look beyond the chatter and noise and you look at it, there's one thing very clear. That what President Trump has done and is doing, what he said he was going to turn the page on American policy, both domestic and foreign, on economic and military, put America first. And putting America first is not making America alone, but changing this bipartisan or uniparty policy of the Democrats and the Republicans over the last 25, 30 years that has brought nothing but the longest war, the continuous warfare in the Middle East, and that he is going to act decisively in America's interest. And that's what he has done. And instead of World War III, the noise is there, noise is coming out of Washington and New York. There is no World War III. I'm looking at pictures coming from the Middle East where the Iraqis are celebrating, where they're out in the street. And the question is why? And that's I think, where maybe we are heading into this discussion. Look, President Trump is not starting World War III, nor is President Trump declaring a war on Iran. I mean, he was asked only a couple of nights ago, or evenings ago, when he ordered the strike on the Iraqi airfield, where the Iranian-backed militias had burst in and taken out, and there were casualties. An American contractor had died, and so on. And he had ordered a military strike. He said, it was the eve of a new year, he said that he's not looking for a war with Iran, no more than was he looking for a war with North Korea. But what he's also done is that he's not going to allow these people to push America around.
It's like a bully, isn't it? When you punch a bully in the nose, he cries, he stops, he does not continue his aggression. When you pay them $1.7 billion or whatever that figure was that Obama sent over to Iran, $150 million. Well, whatever the amount was, in basically unmarked small bills on a plane chartered to go to Iran, that kind of behavior emboldens a bully.
Exactly. So what it is that there has been a policy of continuous appeasement. Remember, in the case of Iran, and we're going to talk about Iran, and we're talking about Iran, as I was pointing out, it's not America, it's not President Trump starting a war with Iran. It's Iran that declared a war 40 years ago, as you began in your opening remarks.
Yes, death to the great Satan. They celebrate that and chant that every year for the past 40 years. They celebrate death to America.
Precisely. So 40 years ago, It was Iran, the Iranian Revolution, followed by the taking of the American hostages. 52 American diplomats were held by the Iranian regime for 444 days through 1979, 1980, till on the day of Reagan's inauguration, they were released.
I
Now, what
remember it
happened?
well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we were young. I mean, I was still in the university. I was in graduate school at that time. I just entered graduate school. So, I mean, it was the same sort of concern that, any action by the United States would possibly precipitate a war. But it was just the reverse. When President Reagan came to office, the Iranians realized that it was a different man there now. It was no longer President Carter trying to bend backwards and appease the Iranian and find a negotiated settlement to which was an act of war. It was a hostile act. So for 40 years, Iran has been given a free pass. That's basically what has happened. Iran has tried to spread its Islamic revolution, which is both anti-West, which is also medieval. I mean, there was no one more medieval apart from the Saudi monarchy and the Arab potentates, more medieval than Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the Iranian Revolution. I mean, he was a man who basically stepped out of 10th century history, as if nothing had happened in between. And he was going to take back Iran to his own imaginary world of Islam and Islamic Republic. So this push of Iran since 1979 to come to dominate the Middle East. Iran is, in that sense, the biggest nation state or country in the region in terms of population. In terms of history, it has a very long history. The Persian relationship or Persian history goes all the way back to the wars with the Greeks, in 3rd, 4th century BC. So it has long memories of its own past, of its own grandeur, own glory, but we are in modern times. It has the resources. It sits on the Persian Gulf. Oil resources, and it's an oil power, OPEC, and so on. And it was going to use this to spread its politics, its view of the world. And it was going to do this. I mean, there is the old Persian-Arab conflict, but in the name of Islam, and so Arabs are Muslim, except there is internal division between Shia and Sunni, but that again will take us into the weed. But the point is that, it was going to do this, it was going to draw upon Arab Muslim sentiment, Arab anti-West sentiment based upon Arab opposition to, that is the public opinion that has been created over the most of the 20th century against Israel and the conflicts and the wars in Israel. So while some of the Arab leaders were trying to put aside and bring to an end the Arab-Israeli conflict, most notably in 1979, it was the president of the largest Arab state, that is Egypt, Anwar Sadat, who negotiated an end to war with Israel, negotiated a peace treaty, and who was then killed in 1981. Now you have Iran stepping in to say that it is going to take the leadership of the Middle East, of the Arab world, of the Muslim world, and fight against Israel, annihilate Israel, and that was a way to tap into the mob or the popular view on the Arab street. Okay, so that's the beginning, and it's a long history. The Iran file is a long file. We don't have the time to go into it. But here's the critical thing, that once the Iran, by the way, had a 10-year warfare with Iraq in the 1980s. It was one of the most gruesome warfare since the end of World War I.
2 million dead, wasn't it? Something like that. Some outrageous number of dead on both sides, and it was a stalemate.
Estimated over 1 million dead. The cost of the war is estimated in the region of a couple of $1 trillion. Iran could not overrun Iraq. Iraq is a much smaller country. Iraq is divided again between different ethnic groups and among the Muslim between Shia and Sunni. Iraq has a Shia majority. And the war was fought between Saddam Hussein and Ayatollah Khomeini. 10 years later, it was brought to some sort of an armistice, and that led to opening up of a new series of warfare when Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait, that led to the Gulf War I, and so on and so forth. The point is that Iran has been in a state of war with the Middle East and has been trying to push that war abroad so they can dominate. So again, we have seen this with Soviet Union, the Russian Revolution. We have seen this with the Chinese, that these totalitarian regimes, they can only survive and maintain itself in power so long it can export its revolution and create mayhem around it. All totalitarian regimes, by definition, are regimes of fear. And so its population, its own people, are basically held as prisoners to the leadership that is in power.
That's another reason why we're not seeing any celebrations to any great extent in Tehran or Iran, because they are living under a brutal theocracy, a dictatorship, and any such exuberant behavior in favor of Soleimani being killed would be put down brutally. So for American Democrats, the left, to say that the Iranians, that this is bad for Iran, they're not seeing the whole picture. They're seeing it with rose-colored glasses, aren't they?
No, see, there are two elements of it. There's the foreign policy element, that is the world abroad, and so we're talking about Iran, Middle East, and the United States' relationship with these countries, whether it's North Korea, whether it's China, the Middle East, and Europe. So that's the foreign policy side. There's a domestic side, and every act domestically, I'm talking about America, will be politicized. You know, there is talked about it, separation of power. The president is chief executive, the president, whoever is the president, the chief executive and the commander-in-chief of the army. Foreign policy is within the jurisdiction of the presidency, but the purse, money, comes out of the Congress. So
let's talk about that, Salim. I wanted to bring up a couple of points. Maybe you can expand on them. First of all, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi have their knickers in a twist because Trump did not consult with the lower house of Congress before he had this one action. Although why this one action should be any different than the hundreds of actions that the United States and the president has done is any different, I don't know. But Dinesh D'Souza, in response on Twitter to somebody complaining about that, said, well, there's a good reason he didn't tell Congress. The same reason he didn't tell Iran. It's because the two are in cahoots. I can tell you now, with no doubt, that if Trump had gotten Schumer or Pelosi or any of the House Democrats on the phone saying, I'm going to go in and take out Soleimani, they would have been on the phone the next minute warning the fella not to take that motorcade from the airport. That's why he doesn't involve the Congress. Secondly, Salim, and again, we're going back in history, back to 83 and 90, I believe. 83 was the invasion of Grenada, and Ronald Reagan did that. Now, he did talk the same day at that time with some members of the Congress, filling them in. I don't think he asked permission. There was certainly never a vote to invade Grenada. And in 1989-90, he went into Panama. And he did not, at that time, ask permission from Congress to go in and arrest the president of Panama. It's Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives the sole discretion to Congress to declare war. But in this day and age, when things turn on a dime and you can pick up your phone and let your enemies know exactly what's going to happen, sometimes Article 1, Section 8 has to be circumvented, if not totally ignored, by a president who's trying to save his people. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, we can keep picking up, events and incidents and talk about it. But the main point is, constitutionally, as you just mention the declaration of war, and therefore, the purse, the money, the expense that will be needed has to come from the approval of the people, that is the Congress. But the president is the one who leads the subject matter. President is the commander in chief, and it is he who decides what action will be taken, how to be taken, both the tactical and the strategic, and so on and so forth, and the entire gamut of the foreign policy. The role of the Congress on foreign policy is again part of the oversight. So you have the House Foreign Relations Committee, you have the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and they'll sit down. The problem comes when you have a Republican president and a Democratic House. When a Democrat president is there, it's all fine and dandy if it is the Democratic House. And if it is a Republican House, which has been very few and far in between in the last, 75 years or so since the end of Second World War, most of the time the House has been controlled by the Democrats. So if there is a Republican-controlled House, if there is a Republican speaker, like Newt Gingrich was a Republican speaker at the time of Bill Clinton in office, on the issue of security and military matter, the Republicans, it is part of their political DNA, you might say, that they defer to the White House, they defer to the president, they don't challenge the president, they don't question the president. But the historical record is that the Democrats do that. When Obama was the president, or when Bill Clinton was the president took action, or they didn't take action when they should have taken action.
As a matter of fact, it's a little known fact that when Reagan took action in Grenada, there was a bunch of House Democrats who introduced a motion to have him impeached. It didn't go anywhere, but there you have it again. This partisanship on the part of the Democrats is such a blatant slap in the face of the history and the makeup of the government in the United States that it's laughable.
Right. So the point is well taken, and we can go into many things. I mean, the IranContra hearing during the President Reagan's time was manufactured by the Democratic House to question, what the president was trying to do. That is, the president's people was under president's command was trying to do in terms of the Iran-Iraq war that was going on, and how to manage that war. And president was willing to, at that time, provide some critical military equipment to the Iranians via Israel. That led to the Iran-Contra hearing and all the fiasco of that. But back to the point that you're making right now, all the noise that is coming out is because Nancy Pelosi is the speaker and is a Democratic House. The other quick point I would say, again, without getting into the weeds, is when it comes to President Trump, he has not been given even 5 minutes during his 3.5 years of presidency, the respect that is due to the president by the Democratic House. In fact, they started talking about impeaching the president soon after the election in 2016, in November 8th of 2016. Then when he was inaugurated, they immediately, 19 minutes after he had taken oath of office, the Washington Post ran a headline that the Democrats are getting ready to impeach the president. The whole Russia-Trump collusion, which turned out to be a dud, there was nothing. Now the whole Ukrainian issue upon which they have brought about impeachment. So the question has to be flipped around. Why should President Trump advise a hostile, democratic-controlled Congress who he knows, his people know, that they will leak? They will leak and they will, undermine anything that the president is doing in the greater interest of the United States. But coming back to the Iran issue, Iran was emboldened. Iran was emboldened since that time. I mean, Reagan foreign policy, which became known as the Reagan Doctrine, soon after Reagan was inaugurated and the Iranians released the 52 hostages, that they had held for 444 days was that the United States will not ever negotiate with terrorists and those who finance terrorists and the hostage takers. That was Reagan's position, you know. Well, Reagan was left. It's now almost 40 years that presidency is over. Reagan was focused upon dealing with the evil Soviet empire, and that's what collapsed under Reagan's watch. And the Cold War ended. Reagan is gone. Since then, what has happened is on the Iran file, there has been basically a politics or policy of appeasement, of trying to find a diplomatic way to engage with Iran and bring Iran into some sort of an agreement with the United States and with the community of nations in the United Nations and so on and so forth. But Iran has its own agenda. And Iran has pursued its agenda, that is the Iran regime has pursued its agenda in a deliberate fashion, despite the American effort to appeasement. The American effort to appeasement reached its crescendo with the Obama regime. And the crown jewel, so to speak, of the appeasement by Obama during the 8 years of Obama regime was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That's a long title of what is the Iran nuclear deal. And this was supported by Obama. In fact, it was negotiated by Obama and his people. Secretary John Kerry, former senator, became the Secretary of State, led that negotiation. And it was signed by at the United Nations, what is called Iran plus P5 plus 1. P5 is the 5 Security Council members, Russia, China, United States, France, and Britain. Plus 1 is Germany and the European Union. I want to make this point very clear, Robert. I mean, I hope our people listening to us will understand. This was globalism in action. It was UN signed agreement at the UN. It did not get a Senate approval. All US obligation, which is treaty obligation, has to have a vote in the Senate. And it is not simply a simple majority, 51 senators voting for the treaty. It is 2/3 requirement. And because Obama did not have 2/3 vote, because Obama did not have 67 Democratic senators there. He had a majority in the Democrat. Harry Reid was a Senate majority leader, that's a Democrat. But there were Republican senators there. And so to short circuit the US Senate requirement, constitutional requirement, they signed this agreement as a UN agreement, and they did not get the vote in the US Senate. In fact, the vote that they got was the reverse of the 67 vote in the US Senate. It was a motion that was moved, and Senator Coker of Tennessee, by the way, a Republican, and so these are all uniparty, they all agree. This is a bipartisan consensus. He moved a motion that if there is no 67 votes against the deal, then the deal will pass. So it was a reversal of the US Constitution. This itself needs a lot of discussion, but the key point is it was a globalist agenda. So in 2016, when Obama's year in office is coming to an end, 2 terms is coming to an end, he left behind this legacy of a deal with Iran, a nuclear deal with Iran, that Iran will be able to, under a very managed system, if Iran wants it, break out of this agreement 10 years down the road and possibly get its nuclear bomb, which is what has been Iran's declaration. So to cut this narrative short and quick, President Trump comes along and he says no. And he tears up the deal. He not only tears up the deal from the United States point of view, that is the United States as a signatory to the UN brokered deal, United States tore it up. he basically rejected the UN and the globalists, the European Union. And instead, he ratcheted up the sanction. And the sanctions are biting Iran. But the sanctions mean that if any other country, basically the European country and Japan, or any other country wants to engage with Iran under the US sanction, then those countries will have to calculate, have to weigh the balance, whether they prefer to deal with Iran and lose their trading arrangement with United States. Okay, so the Europeans were forced to, European banks and European states, particularly Germany, was forced to maintain their own relationship with the world's largest market, that is the United States, carry on with the sanction. But the sanction, they wanted uplifted. And they've been putting a lot of pressure on the US, that is on President Trump, to remove the sanction. So the chatter that you are hearing, we are hearing, the people are hearing in the last 24 hours by the Democrats, that the president is engaging or has possibly going to ignite a World War III, is basically to put pressure on President Trump to change the US foreign policy vis-a-vis Iran. And Trump is not about to do that. In fact, Trump wants to ratchet up. And this taking out of Qassem Soleimani, who was the brain of the Iranian terrorist operation worldwide. How worldwide, Robert? As worldwide as Latin America, into Venezuela, into Cuba, into Argentina. In the 1990s, Iranians blew up the Israeli cultural center in Buenos Aires. You know, senior Iranian officials were later found out to have been involved in it, and they were indicted. So this is a sort of a global effort on the part of the Iranian regime to spread its tentacles of fear through terrorism. And of course, in the Middle East, you know. So now you see the point of view. If you pull all of these things together, recently, in the month of October, Iranian drone and Iranian missile attacked the most important oil terminal in Saudi Arabia. That was an act of war. But there was no retaliation from Saudi Arabia because the president basically kept these people, you know, subdued, would not allow a retaliation. But at this point in time, because of what happened on New Year's Eve in the US Embassy in Baghdad, and immediately the same people who were making noise were the ones, before Soleimani was taken out, were saying, well, this is going to be President Trump's Benghazi. Remember 2012? The Al-Qaeda in Africa and their various terrorist groups attacked the US consulate in Benghazi, where 4 Americans died, including the US ambassador. And what was the response of Obama? And
or Hillary Clinton? What did Clinton say? What difference at this point does it make?
Exactly. The Secretary of State, they were asking 48 hours. They were asking for reinforcement. They were asking for some sort of, you know, military help from as close by. Within an hour, they could have flown from Italy to Libya, just a hop and a jump across the Mediterranean, you know, and no help came. And the ambassador died with 4 Marines. And as you said, you know, Hillary Clinton in the Senate hearing said, you know, what does it matter? You know, so that is the Obama regime. That is the Democratic policy of appeasement. On the other side is President Trump has said this is his foreign policy, a foreign policy that has been opposed by the entire establishment class in Washington, D.C. It doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter whether you're part of the permanent bureaucracy, that is the State Department and the national security official. They have all opposed President Trump's foreign policy, which simply put was put America first, make America great again, end the wars, come back home. The world has changed. We have to be ready for the 21st century. And this would take us, if you want to prolong, go deep into the discussion, what is the nature of the American world, the global order in the 21st century in contrast to the global order of the 20th century. And President Trump is pivoting America to the 21st century, and that's where this whole issue, whole chatter, whole noise have to be put in place. The people who talk about peace are the people who have fueled this longest drawn out war in the Middle East with no conclusion. What President Trump is doing is, I'm reminded here, Robert, of President Theodore Roosevelt from the 19th century famous statement. You will recall.
Speak softly,
speak softly.
Stick.
Carry a big stick. Now, some people will say, well, President Trump doesn't speak softly. But what he speaks is his style of speaking. But he has gone the extra mile. He has opened up and reached out to the people and said, let's make a deal. He's the man who makes a deal. But, and here is the point, but if you're going to make a deal and if you're going to come back into, the global order, rule of law, civilization, you have to give up your practices. You have to give up.
Yes. President Trump today tweeted along that point, Salim. What did he tweet? He said, Iran has never won a war, but they have never lost a negotiation. Exactly. Trump is a negotiator. And Iran has absolutely no intention of ever negotiating. They are ideologues. They are theocratic ideologues who would martyr themselves and millions for their goals. Trump knows this, and he's not going to put up with that nonsense. He's not going to allow another Benghazi, and that's to his credit. And I loved his tweet. His first tweet this morning after the attack on Soleimani was simply this. He tweeted out an American flag. What more needs to be said?
And Michael Moore, the great supporter of the Democrat, he tweeted out American flag painted green. Did you see that tweet?
No.
Well, that tells you everything, it is there. Michael Moore's tweet, which I saw, was the American, red and white stripes painted green, and the star on blue background painted red. That is the Iranian color, red and green. And so the American flag was turning to an Iranian color. But this is what it is. The Democrats have always cheered for the opponent of America. Again, it's what you have raised now. If you want the psychology or the politics, it goes all the way back to the Vietnam War. It was the Democrat president that started the Vietnam War. It was not Eisenhower who went into Vietnam. He kept America out of Vietnam. It was John F. Kennedy and later on Lyndon B. Johnson, yes, who started the war, who in fact manufactured the Tonkin Gulf Resolution on the basis that a North Vietnamese had fired missile at US warships in the Gulf of Tonkin. Later on, it was proven that there was no such firing taking place. But where were the Democrat House and Democrat senators then? Lyndon B. Johnson had both the Senate and the House under Democratic control. They passed the Gulf War resolution. It was a democratic war, but when the war turned, negative or bad, it was the Democrats who then blamed Nixon, who was trying to bring an end to the war without surrendering to the communists. That is, by trying to negotiate and settle the war in a manner in which North Vietnam would stop its aggression against South Vietnam. And that would then be, the war would come to an end. What the Democrats did, they pulled the plug on the agreement that President Nixon and Henry Kissinger signed in Paris in 1972, just before going into the 1972 election. And the plug that they pulled out was that the promise, that the agreement was that the Americans would be maintaining support for the South Vietnamese government by arming them and keeping them equipped with arms. The Democrats pulled the plug. South Vietnam was, not provided with the support that they deserved. And Nixon administration went down the rabbit hole of Watergate scandal. Back again, if you want to see similarities, 72 election happened. Nixon won that election, re-election, with a massive majority. And then against McGovern, who was like John Kerry, rooting for the Vietnamese, talking about bringing America back home. This is an imperialist war and so on and so forth. Not negotiate with China, when Nixon had gone to China. And we saw 3 years later, millions of Vietnamese were boat people fleeing the communists, running away from the takeover of South Vietnam by North Vietnam. And all of Southeast Asia went through a terrible time with the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, the massacre, the killing field. People's memory is not there, and they forget about all of these things. But the Democrats have been true to their playbook. When they do not have the White House, they are in opposition to the American leadership, that is to the American people who have elected the president, in support of all of the rabid crowds abroad. President Reagan was opposed by Senator Kennedy by going all the way to Moscow to work with the Soviet Union against the interests of America, that is against Reagan foreign policy. Now we all know all of these things. These records are now completely open. That's where the issue is right now. Taking out Soleimani, like taking out Baghdadi. Baghdadi could have been taken out by Obama. Why didn't he take him out? Or he could have been taken out by any of the Arab leaders, whether it was the Syrian president or the Iraqi or even the Iranian, because this guy was a mastermind terrorist, the most vulgar terrorist, Baghdadi. The genocide against the Christians, the genocide against the Yazidis that happened under Baghdadi. Why did it have to be all, in the sense of wait until President Trump came to office, who then ordered the taking out of Baghdadi? It was in 1998 that this man, Osama bin Laden, was in the crosshair of the American forces around Kabul. Remember, 1998 is after the Soviets had withdrawn from Afghanistan after a decade-long Afghan war that the Americans supported against the Soviet Union, that led to the rise of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and so on. Osama bin Laden was on the gun side. President Clinton was informed, and he refused to take him out. Now ask yourself the question, Robert. If Osama bin Laden had been taken out in 1998, this is the what if of history. Would there have been a 9/11? Would there have been all that has happened ever since that time? It is as if going all the way back to, if Lenin had been taken out, instead of Lenin being sent by that SEAL train by the Germans to Moscow in 1917, what would have been the 20th century history? So for the Democrats to say what they are saying, it is, again, the low information voters. It is, again, playing upon, their own year-long teaching that has happened, decades and decades of educating Americans who are now of our generation and younger, that America is the bad guy in the world. All the problem in the world has been brought about by the Americans. This is the Democratic talking point. You know, you attack the 1%, the rich, the capitalists, and you change it, and you look at it. Who is the Democrats about to nominate in their 2020 election? Their candidate. It could very well be Bernie Sanders, who's now, you know, seemed to be quite prominent after he lost out to Hillary Clinton in 2016 election, lost out in the sense that it was all, you know, manipulated, that he would not get the nomination. He could well be, but this is where the Democratic Party is. I mean, who is cheering for Qassem Soleimani, Representative Ilhan Omar, you know, the congresswoman recently elected from 2018 from Minnesota, or Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Palestinian origin, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You know, all of them see that America needs what Obama, on the eve of his election, had said: America is 5 days away from a profound transformation, a radical transformation. That's what they want to do. They want to take away the American constitutional rule system, republic, and make it into a mob rule, simply a majoritarian government, and go in the direction of the globalists.
It's a very complex issue, isn't it? Especially when you put it in the context of history, and we forget history at our peril. So I have to thank you, Salim, and I'm sure that we'll be talking about this and his ramifications.
Can I have? Do we have time? Can I have one more minute?
All the time you want. But we do have it ended at some point.
Here it is. I mean, you just mentioned about the Iranians. They're very quiet. Yeah, they're very quiet. Remember, only a few months ago, the Iranians were out in the street demonstrating against the regime, and the regime has fallen. But I have in my hand, right here, New York Times report from 2003 and 2006. And this report, in fact, it is an interview done by the grandson of Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the Islamic Republic. And I just want to read a quote. This is what Hussein Khomeini, the grandson of Ayatollah Khomeini, is saying. He was, by the way, in 2003, after the American took over Baghdad, the regime change in Iraq and got rid of Saddam Hussein. Soon after that liberation, quote unquote, of Baghdad by the American forces in 2003, the grandson of Khomeini arrived in Baghdad. And he spoke there. But then in this interview, he recalls what he spoke in 2003 in Baghdad to the New York Times reporter. And this is what he says. He says, quote, "My grandfather's revolution has devoured its children and has strayed from its course. I lived through the revolution, and it called for freedom and democracy, but it has now persecuted its leaders." He went on to say, "I wish the Americans would go to Iran and liberate us."
And that's from the grandson of Khomeini.
This is the grandson of Khomeini. And what was the president of the United States doing? Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, equipping this totalitarian regime with a nuclear deal. And that's what President Trump has torn apart. That's what the taking out of Qassem Soleimani means, sending a clear message to the Iranian leadership, like he sent the message to the North Korean leader that I have a bigger red button, you know. But if you want to negotiate, we will negotiate. We will find a way out so that you can come and join the civilized world. But it is, if you want to be part of the civilized world, these are the conditions. That's exactly what the conflict with China is all about. You know, the last 4 presidents over the past 25 years, without any conditionality, brought China into the World Trade Organization, and the result has been the transfer, as President Trump has pointed out, the biggest transfer of wealth from the United States and the Western countries to China with no reciprocity. See, so the tariff war is to make China, to break China and make China understand that there is a rule of law, there is a democracy. That's what is happening in Hong Kong. Where is Mr. Schumer or Nancy Pelosi on Hong Kong? And that's exactly, if there is silence in Iran, in the famous story of Sherlock Holmes, the hounds of Baskerville, why did not the dogs bark? Why aren't the Iranian people barking or waking up? It is because it's a totalitarian regime. I just read you, the grandson of Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the saying, we wish that the Americans came to Iran and liberated us.
Trump is not going to do that, however, because Trump certainly does not want to entangle the United States into other people's affairs, and he's been very clear about that.
Exactly. So the point is that you weaken the regime, and that's what is happening. The sanction is dramatically weakening the regime. And what the Iranian terrorists, that is Soleimani, was trying to do was to threaten the neighboring countries to take, that was his way of taking the war out, while squeezing its own population. Well, Trump has decapitated their leader in this matter.
And
maybe Nancy Pelosi and Schumer and Adam Schiff and all of these guys who have been running a fake impeachment against Trump, they might be having a funeral watch for Qassem Soleimani, and they will do whatever they have to do.
I forget.
But this is a very significant event that has happened.
I forget who tweeted it out today, unfortunately, but it was directed at, I think, Chuck Schumer. And the tweet was, "Sorry for your loss." That says volumes right there. I think the American people realize and know that the Democrats in power right now are not the Democrats of 40, 50 years ago. They are the enemies of America and the enemies of the people and a free world.
They're the globalists. And now, just as America stood up against, and the free world under American leadership stood up against the Communist International, the Soviet Union, through the 20th century, that history itself has been forgotten. Today, again, America either stands up against globalism or America goes down under globalism. And then the interesting question as we wrap this up, Robert, is why there is such a silence out of Ottawa. Has the Prime Minister returned from his Costa Rican trip?
I don't know, but the Foreign Minister did issue a statement today, which was sort of yes and no type of things, fence sitting. They are keeping an eye on the situation with Canadians and Canadian soldiers, and they are also keeping an eye, or had kept an eye, on Soleimani's actions in the past. So it was trying to fence sit, I think. Very interesting.
And that's been one of my main arguments, that Canada has to have its own transformative election that changes Canada's foreign policy and brings it back to where it is, in a close relationship with the United States and against the globalists. We should have been putting out the message that we are together with President Trump on this matter, that the taking out of Qassem Soleimani has been a very important step in the process by which we, the Western powers, and in particular the United States, can provide assistance from outside for the Iranian people to liberate themselves and once again become a free people.
Such a statement, however, would require a moral judgment on the part of Justin Trudeau, and I think that's a little beyond him.
Absolutely, and that raises a whole lot of question of who these people are and why are they backing the globalists. What is their connection with Iran? We do understand that there are connections with Iran. I believe Justin Trudeau's brother has been deeply involved with Alexander or Alex or whatever his name is, Shata, his nickname. Trudeau has been involved with the Iranians. And then there are a large Iranian diaspora in Canada, in the GTA, in Toronto, And we have lately heard about sort of a confirmation that one of the liberal MPs of Iranian origin is, in a sense, an asset of the Iranian regime.
He
So there
has
you
denied
have it.
it, and who do you believe in this situation, though?
Well, it is not beyond, it is not outside of the realm of
No.
possibility, because as I pointed out, these people reached out, Venezuela, Cuba, Argentina, Colombia, because there is that diaspora around, and this is the globalist tentacle, and the globalist forces. They are operating in a manner in which they have the money, they have the resources, they own the corporate media, and so what you and I are talking will not be found anyone discussing in the corporate media. Nobody is going to talk about that it was in 2006, and I'm quoting New York Times. I'm not quoting some other outlet reporting that the Ayatollah Khomeini's grandson was talking about freedom and democracy and praying for Americans to help liberate the Iranians.
It's true. It's true, and I think that's what this type of platform, video on the internet, is for. These long-form discussions that you and I have really delve into the topics that people are just being superficially glancing over in the mainstream media, to our peril, because all you see is Orange Man bad, and things like that, or people don't even know what Benghazi is anymore, let alone Grenada and Panama and all those things. This is ancient history to most of the electorate out there, and I'm glad we had this discussion, Salim, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more to come.
Thank you.
Thank you, Salim.
Robert.
Take care.
Bye-bye.